Welcome back. Most of the drama in the 2024 race is on the Republican side of things, with a gradually widening field of candidates vying for the party's nomination. But it doesn't mean President Biden is unopposed within his own party. Let's talk about this and more with Axios' Alex Thompson, who's up late with us tonight, breaking a couple big stories this week on Axios about two of the Democratic candidates. Good to see you, Alex.
Hey, thanks so much for having me.
First of all, let's talk about the story that broke earlier in the week, something that you reported on Axios about President Biden and his apparent propensity for anger and obscenity behind the scenes there. There's been a lot said about this story, and how did this come about?
This came about mainly because of Biden's personal public brand, which is one of sort of a kindly, grandfatherly uncle figure, one who promised on day one of his administration that if he treated anyone with disrespect, that he would fire them on the spot. And I can tell you that some people that have worked for Biden in this administration don't think that the president has met that standard. Now, he does have his defenders that say that he's just being meticulous, that yes, he's a tough boss, but he's also incredibly generous. But behind the scenes, he has such a temper that some White House officials literally do not want to meet with him one-on-one, and they will bring in other aides to sort of be like a shield for, a solo blast. Because, Joe Biden, our fun headline was Old Yeller, but I can tell you also that he was a young Yeller too. And that this image that he has, I think, very carefully constructed in the public image as being this very kind, empathetic while there is truth to that, there is another side that is much angrier, much tougher. And that is actually partly why this story came about. I think some aides were like, the person who is Joe Biden behind closed doors is much more complicated and much more, in some ways, interesting than the public image that he gives off.
And obviously when you report on something like this, and clearly something that you'll have many people within the White House, many people in the president's corner think, well, what difference does something like that make? Does that affect the job that's being done? And as you mentioned in the piece there, I mean, there are people that say this was how he operated for a very, very long time. It shouldn't be a surprise to people who know him within the orbit of Washington, whether that's a good thing or a bad thing.
Yeah, I mean, at the same time, it definitely affects how he does the job as president, which is, I think, part of the reason why I really wanted to excavate the story, because I do think it was, it does come as a bit of a surprise to people that have been around a while. I do also think part of the reason why this side of him has not leaked out for a long time, actually, someone in the administration or someone who's worked for him before has told me this, is that, he does combine this being incredibly tough and in some cases volcanic temper with these occasional signs of incredible grace and compassion. He calls people's grandmothers, he calls people's fathers and mothers, their sisters, their brothers. He will be there in times of crisis for his staff in ways that some powerful politicians in DC are not. And I think as a result, a lot of staff sometimes around Joe Biden feel like they are part of the family, which is why, in some cases they excuse, they rationalize. They also think that, this is just him, this is part of him, and shouldn't necessarily be newsworthy.
Yeah, especially too, and you mentioned the story that time when he called Peter Doocy from Fox News a stupid SOB. Clearly, people said, oh, that's a Biden gaffe. But I want to move on to another story about RFK Jr., something that you reported later on in the week, what we're learning about his campaign here, and something that he is bucking the trend when it comes to Democratic candidates, where he seems to be moving away from the idea that everything that he sells, all that merch, has to be either union-made or made in the U.S. here.
Absolutely. So we obtained some Robert F. Kennedy Jr. merchandise. We found that his T-shirts are assembled in Honduras. We also found that stickers and other materials were not printed in a union shop. Now, the reason why this is interesting is because this is a long-time rule of Democratic politics. Everything that a campaign sells, everything that a campaign even gives out, should be made in the USA, and if you can, have it union made or union printed. The fact that, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who has stated that he really, he is unorthodox in many of his his positions when it comes to the Democratic Party. He's very much criticized Joe Biden on his position on the Ukraine war. He's criticized, obviously, on vaccines and many other issues. But on unions, he's very publicly been sort of in line with the Democratic tradition. So that's why it was really striking to me and to Axios that we found that, he was sort of bucking this, longtime Democratic campaign rule when it came to his own campaign merchandise.
And in the story, you also talk about, as we look down at unions and clearly who's going to be supporting who. And the last question I have is, you don't necessarily have all unions in lockstep with the idea of a second Biden term, because, for example, the United Auto Workers have some concern with some of the policies and maybe where they may be falling in line going into this campaign cycle.
It's such a smart question, because the Biden campaign, it was not a mistake that his first campaign rally was actually held with a bunch of the big unions that are supporting him. It is very much a key to what they see as his appeal for a second term. But the United Auto Workers, which not only is one of the biggest unions, but certainly one of the most storied unions, that may resemble more of the quote-unquote Scranton Joe ethos that Joe Biden purports to, has very stridently resisted endorsing the president for a second term. They are going about their own negotiations right now. There's possibility of a strike. And I think this is going to be a relationship that is something to really watch for over the next year. I don't think it's completely out of the question that they sit this out or even endorse somebody else besides Joe Biden.
Or at least wait until the general. Alex Thompson from Axios, thanks for joining us tonight. We appreciate it.
You're the best.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Final Five's back after this.